From WBUR Boston, I'm Jackie Leiden in for Tom Ashbrook, and this is On Point. To a lot of Americans, Texas is kind of like your dear old aunt at the family gatherings. A little too brash, politically a little extreme, but she's entertaining and, Lord knows, part of the family. Columnist Gail has had a lot of fun tweaking the Texan nose over the years, but one day she realized it's no joke. Texas, she says, has had an outsized role in this nation's modern destiny, giving us everything from presidents to our textbooks to our tax policies. This hour, On Point, the Lone Star State and the American Agenda. You can join the conversation. How do you think the Lone Star State has influenced the national agenda? How has LBJ, 2 Bushes, 1 Rick Perry, an army of Dick Army Republicans changed America? You can comment at our website, onpointradio.org, or on Twitter and Facebook at On Point Radio. And joining me now from New York, not Texas, is Gail Collins, New York Times national columnist. Her new book is called As Texas Goes, How the Lone Star State Hijacked the American Agenda. And by the way, you can read an excerpt of Gail's book on our website at onpointradio.org. Welcome to On Point, Gail Collins.
Thank you, Jackie. Good to be here.
So it's fascinating to go along on this ride with you. You have been writing about Texas, as we pointed out, for a very long time, but you got particularly interested in 2009. What happened?
Yeah, that was when the famous Rick Perry secession speech happened. And he did not actually call for secession. He just gave a speech vigorously attacking the federal government to a large group of people waving secede signs. But and then afterwards said that he certainly didn't expect to break up the Union, but if Washington continued to be so awful, who knows what might happen. And it didn't sound to me like a real commitment. I don't know, And so I thought, wow, why? And they were so angry. There were tons of Tea Party rallies going on in Texas at that point in time. And I kept thinking, this is the state that runs the country. Most of the national agenda has been set by Texas or Texans over the last 30 years. Why are they so ticked off? And so I kind of went to Texas to explore.
We have just a little clip here, not precisely from that rally at the Tea Party in Austin. You wrote there were rallies at that point after the stimulus every time at cow mood. But this is from, I think, right around that time in March in 2009, Governor Perry is speaking to conservative bloggers from the governor's office in Austin, and he's complaining about the policies coming out of President Obama's Washington and warning that tape is pretty good, but maybe not the best. Here we go.
Texans do have a little different feeling about independence, and when we came into the nation in 1845, we were a republic, we were a standalone nation, and one of the deals was we can leave any time we want. Yeah. So we're kind of thinking about that again.
Well, leave any time Texas wants, thinking about it again, that's kind of what got you going and why they were so, as you put it, ticked off.
Yeah, and they actually can't leave any time they want. That's one of the Texas sort of myths. But you're not feeling the love if you're another state and you're hearing stuff like that.
So you decide you're going to go, and you start with the history lesson. You go to the Alamo.
I went to the Alamo a couple of times, and I went to the state capitol. The Alamo is very every school child, I swear, in Texas goes on a pilgrimage to the Alamo at some point or another. It's very sort of central to Texas feeling of Texasness and self-identity. And I found it interesting because my only thought about the Alamo until then had been that Davy Crockett died there, and I saw that when I was a kid on TV. And then I found out that maybe Davy Crockett didn't die there, which was a real trauma. But he may have been captured and died later. We don't know. But when I went in and I was listening to the story, and I thought, wow, this is heroic men with a very bad plan. This is, these guys should not have died there. They should have just gotten out and gone to fight again the next day. But that vision of the independent stand, taking a possibly losing but very violently felt independent stand for yourself is just very central, I think, to Texas identity.
Now, there's things about Texas that, in terms of its eccentricities, you mentioned that I think we've all come to cherish the idea of beauty pageants or the Dallas Cowboys or some of the more eccentric people and entertainers and even politicians who've come out. But you wanted to look at what was it? What agenda was it that you think Texas is setting that the rest of us must follow? That you think is a contradiction to their feeling so oppressed by policies from Washington?
Well, the first contradiction is the fact that Texas feels so oppressed, but in fact Texas has been setting the agenda for the rest of us to a great extent. I don't want to oversell my point, but the savings
taxes,
and loan,
on savings and loan? Okay.
Look at the savings and loan crisis in the 80s. That happened after Ronald Reagan restructured the federal rules for savings and loans based on the ones in Texas because the Texas S&Ls were doing so well. This was actually because many of them were cooking their books, but he hadn't noticed that at that point in time. So that was in the 80s. The deregulation of the financial markets, which we have all come to feel in recent years, that no one person is there were so many fingers in that pot in Washington. But I think you could argue that one of the very biggest fingers in the pot was that of Senator Phil Gramm, who was head of the Senate Banking Committee. And no child left behind. The way the federal government runs its programs to support public schools in this country was based on George W. Bush's Texas experience. And then you have energy, you have the environment. When George W. ran for president, the Republican platform said that as president he would take care of the environment nationally just the way he had in Texas, which was terrifying because at that point Texas had the worst pollution problems in the country. And, all the land wars that in my lifetime have been fought under Texan presidents. So there's a bunch.
We might just point out that you are from Ohio, which has more presidents sent to the White House than Texas, but maybe right now it just doesn't feel like it.
Well, the Ohio presidents were not particularly Ohio. And Ohio people don't run around with shirts saying, don't mess with Ohio. And we did not pledge allegiance to the Ohio flag. There's a sense of selfness about Texas that I think is really unique.
Would you talk about your whole philosophy of empty spaces? That's one of the things that you really establish here, and that it does come into this uniqueness, this Texan identity.
Yeah, I had always thought when I was covering Congress more that when you would see how people would phrase arguments, before it became so bipolar as it is right now, that the real division was often not between just Republicans and Democrats. It was between people who regarded themselves as representing crowded places and people who felt they were representing empty places. And when you live in a crowded place or perceive yourself as living in a crowded place, you really appreciate government because it's government that protects you from burglars. It's government that keeps dogs from pooping on the sidewalk. It's government that keeps sewers from exploding. There's all kinds of things when people are crowded together that might happen to you. And government protects you. And it's a positive thing. If you perceive yourself as living in an empty place where you're all on your own and you're not bothering anybody else and you don't want anybody to bother you, then government is useless. It's an intrusion. It just bothers you. It takes taxes away from you. And that vision, that empty place vision, is the great power of Texas is that if you're the problem with empty place government, the empty place political theory is that if you are an empty place, you don't have any people, and therefore you don't have much political power. I'm not going to write a book about how Wyoming hijacked the national agenda, but Texas has tons of people, and most of them, 80%, live in metropolitan areas, but yet it's managed to maintain its vision of itself as an empty place.
Well,
and it's partly because it's so huge. People drive 300 miles to go to a football game without thinking about it.
Well, of course, Texas, you say that a lot of them are really living in mega suburbs, suburbanopolises, if you will, that really have nothing to do with the wide open spaces concept.
Yeah, but you do, and it's interesting. It's partly just that you decide that that's what you feel that you are. You live in an empty place in your mind, whether you do or not. But besides that, in Texas, really, it's so. If I didn't know this until I did this book. Texas is so huge that if it was as crowded as New York City, which it does not intend to ever be, the entire planet could fit in Texas. It is so big, and so even though you're living in Houston, you got to drive a long way to get home. You might drive 40, 50, 60, 70 miles within metropolitan Houston just to get home at night. So you don't really feel as if, even though you're in a suburb, there's that sense that things go on forever, that it's very wide open and empty.
Yeah. We should say it is the second biggest state in the union in terms of population, largest in landmass. You just pointed that out. We'll get to some...
if Alaska melts, I think that would be...
largest in the lower 48,
yes.
And we hope Alaska won't. Gail, stick with us. We're speaking with New York Times columnist and author Gail Collins. I'm Jackie Leiden in for Tom Ashbrook, and you are listening to On Point.
Her love is flowing like a Rio Grande. I'm crazy about her, don't you understand? So now don't look for me in Mexico. Oh, there's no reason to go. Now I know everything is better here in Texas. There's no place like my whole San Antonio. Dancing the floor in her Lotus. When I saw her standing alone. Now Mexico ain't nothing but a memory. Pleasant as it might have been, it's gone.
This is On Point. I'm Jackie Leiden in for Tom Ashbrook, and we're talking about the state of Texas and its big influence on the rest of the country's politics. And my guest is New York Times national columnist Gail Collins about her new book, As Goes Texas. Gail, we've been getting a lot of calls during our break, so let's go to a few of them. Robert is calling in from Burlington, Vermont. Welcome to On Point, Robert.
Hi, I was born in Perryton, Texas, and I didn't grow up in Texas, but I have relatives, of course, from Texas. And while there are a lot of decent and lousy people everywhere, it just seems to me a little bit remarkable that to the degree of just blatant self-centeredness and self-righteousness and the sense of entitlement that Texans have to run the place and to be the boss and stuff. I would say, for me, the opposite of Texas is Vermont. And this is the state where we ban billboards from the highways instead of having them blatantly out there messing up the landscape. We had civil unions before anybody else did. Probably we will be the state that has single-payer health care before any other state does. And it's a state where just, like Texas, it was once an independent nation. But the attitude that comes out of people here is just so much different. And I've heard some commentators from Fox cite that difference, that they thought that Vermont was hopeless. And from my point of view, somebody who thinks that Texas is a great place
all right.
that my state is hopeless, well, I'm pretty pleased with it.
All right. Robert, I'm going to put you down as a Vermonter, even if you were born in Texas. Gail, is Vermont the opposite?
Well, it sort of is. I was interested when I went through the state capitol in Texas that, that there's so much, very strong self-awareness of the fact that Texas was once an independent republic. It means so much to Texans. And Vermont was actually an independent republic longer than Texas was, but it doesn't come up in Vermont. I mean, I've never heard anybody in Vermont talk about it. But on the other hand, I do want to say in defense of Texans after your caller that when I was there, I was just bowled over by the graciousness of the people that I met, and I particularly whenever I talk to groups that I feel that I'm stirring up in this sort of anti-Texas way. Houston, Texas, after Hurricane Katrina, took in 200,000 refugees from Louisiana. I cannot imagine easily New York City taking in 200,000 refugees from Newark if they had a hurricane. So you got to give Texans a little more credit, I think, than your last caller did.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about some of the political cast of characters that you mentioned and get into some of the political dimensions that you examined. When we think of Texas politicians today, we do think, some people are going to remember LBJ. We're also, of course, Presidents Bush's, both of them, Rick Perry, the candidate, Dick Armey, leading Congress. How have these particular Texans, do you think, changed the debate? Lee Atwater, most of them Republican.
Karl Rove,
Karl Rove, of course. Thank you.